All right, we see a bit of some technicalities, as you can probably hear in the background here. There's a lot of people joining in. We have explicitly a lot of interest in this particular webinar, but we are allowing in people as we speak, and then hopefully within a few minutes we are ready to go. Good. Time is now ticking. We are 1 minute already beyond the.
Morten, you are muted again. Can you please unmute?
There we go. Here we go. All right. Thank you everybody for joining in on this particular call or just this particular market webinar. We have unusual amount of interest towards this quarterly webinar. We are more than 800 sign-ups, so that is of course super exciting. On behalf of DSV, welcome to today's session. We have a lot of good stuff in front of us. We will of course speak into the expectations from the market for 2025. With me today, I have a lot of good guest speakers, external as well as internal. I have Patrick Berglund, the CEO and co-founder of Xeneta. Patrick, just for the sake of proper management and planning, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear now, Morten. Good to see you, and thank you for inviting me back on.
Very good, and welcome to you, Patrick. Also, internally, I have Mari, I have Thomas, I have Jamie, Anders, Frank, and Arcadio. Guys and girls, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
All good.
Loud and clear, yes.
Yes.
And not to forget, this is in particular a Christmas edition. We are into the midst of December, so we can jolly our way into to the next coming 50 minutes or so. And last but not least, before we start, we have a Q&A section. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, already now you can pop them into that particular session. We will take it up as we go. We will try to cover as much ground as possible, and making the session as dynamic as possible is just gonna making a surplus for everybody, I would anticipate. So with no further ado, and with all the guest speakers and all the good content we have to share, I will just get going. So what is moving the market today? Well, if we look back 18 months or so, this was quite a picture, but just explaining what is actually going on in the market is super complex. So my forehead, which is a rather big one with receding hairlines when you get into the 40s, it is super complex. My palms are starting to sweat because there's so many nuances to how the market is moving. And if we look back 18 months, well, we were talking into the war in Ukraine. We were talking into rising tensions between China and Taiwan, the war trade between the Western economies, Europe as well as China. And we've also seen, you could say, trade imbalances being impacted by offshoring to nearshoring and then onshoring. If we then fast forward till today, then we can add more into the equation. So Trump has recently won the elections in the US. We see the effects from the rising inflation for the past 12, 18 months. We see retail actors that are hardly affecting the market one way or the other. And we have also seen strikes here in the past, both in Europe 1.5 years ago, but also on the US East Coast. So in that regard, it's becoming more and more complex. So it's somewhat a steaming kettle. And if we look back for the past 10 days, what we've seen in Korea, in South Korea, what we've seen in Syria, there is a lot of, you could say, macro economics moving into the equation as well, which we need to be aware about. So just to navigate in this and what we have in the horizon, and of course we will deep dive into this in the next 50 minutes or so. But what we have in front of us when we look into this particular map, where we have, and I can find my laser pointer here as well. Here we go. This is a map indicating if you have to surpass, you could say, the Panama Canal, you have to go south here, right? If you have to reroute compared to Suez, which a lot of the box carriers they do, then you go south, of course. But if we look into the horizon, we see the drought that we've seen in the Panama Canal affecting a lot of vessels now going south as well. This will not be the only area in particular that will be affected when it comes to environmental changes that we see on a global scale. We see the trade wars. What will the impact from Trump going into office again? What will he enforce in that regard? That may have an impact. If we look into the impacts that we've seen recently on offshoring to nearshoring, we've seen a lot of shippers moving production from Far East Asia to Latin America. What will that have an effect on the infrastructure in that particular area? We've seen, you could say, the rising tensions and the outbreaking of a war in the Middle East, where now a lot of the box carriers are going south of the Cape. We have the rising tensions between China and Taiwan. Taiwan being in particular, a very, very important area when it comes to semiconductors being produced. Again, the strikes recently in Europe, and then not only what is it, like a quarter ago when it comes to the US East Coast that was heavily affected one way or the other. And last but not least, not because the inflation is very high at the current point in time, but we now see the effects. Sourcing an employee on the east coast of China is now, I would say, close to 3 times the salary that you can probably source in a country such as Mexico. So what kind of effects will that bring? So this was an opening teaser. I have with me, luckily, a very, very strong expert. That is the CEO and co-founder of Xeneta, Patrick. Patrick, I hope that you can support me in providing some guidance to our audience. What do you say?
Oh man, what a world we live in, huh?
Yeah.
I think that since it's like almost like a Christmas edition, I think it's worthwhile first taking a little bit of step back and see what has happened this year. You touched upon several of these things, but let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you see it, Martin?
Not yet. But let me just swap over here. Here we can.
Beautiful. All right. So let's try and summarize in 2 sentences 2024, right? And to me, I think it's the Red Sea situation and the disruptions we've seen there, and then the change of the networks from the shipping line side, as well as shippers front-loading cargo. Let me show you how I think about this from a sort of market fundamentals point of view. There's 3 lines here, right? So you have in black the demand, TEU demand, and you can see it all the way back to 2019. And from this simple overview, global demand has been really strong in 2024. You can see the blue line representing the fleet size growth on a global scale since 2019. It's grown with 37.6% since 2019. So the big difference this year in 2024 is how long you had to sail in order to deliver a TEU. That's the TEU mile represented in the purple color here, right? And this is really what's driven the market and has had the biggest consequence on ocean shipping this year. If we look at capacity in that picture, you can see that 2024 versus historical numbers and the coming years, it had a significant sort of peak, right? But the next couple of years really seem strong in terms of expected deliveries as well, and you can see that from the blue bars. But the fleet growth is slowing down. Now, as I said in our previous webinar, we then have expectations for the coming year of a 3% demand growth and a 4.5% supply growth. So still over capacity, right? But you got to keep the previous slide that I showed in mind when it comes to the TEU mile, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's just look at the fleet, right? So you can see at the x-axis here, the age of the vessels. In 2016 to 2019, the average age of what they scrapped was 21.5 years, 22. By 2020 to 2023, you could see that average age growing to more than 26, and as per today, year to date, it's 30 years old. Why am I showing this? I'm showing this because the carriers are basically keeping vessels alive because the demand is there, right? So we can debate, the environmental angle on that as much as we want, but there is a sound business case to keep these older vessels alive to service the market because of demand. In fact, if you even look at idle capacity on the chart to the left, more or less all of the vessels are in play. There's no vessel sitting in and resting in any port or outside ports. And then on the right-hand side, you can see charter rates rising, which means that there is still a good demand for vessels from the carrier side. Okay, then going back to that volume component, the demand component. In orange, you see the month-by-month TEUs that has been moved, and twice this year, we've crossed that 16 million TEU mark in May and August, right? So comparing 2024 to the blue line of 21, which we know was a very strong year where rates through COVID skyrocketed, right? It is interesting to see how much stronger 2024 has been. One thing that I think is a bit of a conundrum, though, is that if you look at global GDP, you can see that versus TEU demand, you can see 2016, 17, 18, and so forth, very correlated until 2022, right? Mm-hmm. Where we know that through 22 and into 23, rates collapsed, right? At the end of 22 into 23. And you can see here that it's now more brought back in line with global GDP growth versus TEU demand in 2024. It's closer to each other, and we're expecting a quieter 2025 in principle, right? But I think your intro, Martin, sort of gives a good perspective of the unknowns on the horizon. Let me just go to the last time we had a US election where Donald Trump became president, right? So we, as I said on the previous slide, we expect this multiplier to close in on 1. But just looking at this graph here back in 2018-19, you can see the spot rates to China to Los Angeles in orange and how they more than doubled through April 2018 to September 2018, and how and the underlying reason for that was the front loading of cargo from the shipper side, and you can see their inventories on the right hand y-axis taking a big jump with US importers front loading cargo. So you can see the actions of the shippers due to these political decisions creates a capacity crunch on Trans-Pacific in this example. And we know that we have a president coming in with even more aggressive rhetoric when it comes to tariffs this time around. So that will also be a main driver for how 2025 will play out, right? So that's a little bit looking back and sort of at one point in terms of what we should be expecting and some of our expectations for 2025. What I thought was interesting to share with you is that you don't even need to look midterm or long term into 2025 to be a little bit sort of not necessarily concerned, but aware of a bunch of interesting events that can move this industry, right? So 1st of January, now we're 400 days into the Red Sea crisis. I'll give you a quick deep dive on how that might change 2025 radically in a minute. 15th of January, we have a very likely port strike in the US. That will have knock-on effects depending on how long it lasts. As I said, 20 days into the year, we have a president with who's very vocal about these tariffs. 4 days later, that's when we mark the 35-month time period of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And then 28th of January, this is where the Chinese Lunar New Year starts. And we need to be aware that factories shut down if demand is still strong and rates are rising at that point. There will take quite some time before the situation is sort of cleared out and the backlog is gone. Finally, before we go into month 2 of the year, 2 new alliances comes into effect and 2 alliances are dissolved. So it's a very busy start of 2025. Now I'm gonna push us forward and I'm gonna go to just the TU mile point, right? Because either there is no return to the Red Sea in terms of transits, or there's a full return or a partial return. And if you just look at TU miles that I covered and how important that driver were for the market in 2024, you can see the sort of range of outcomes here with these 3 different scenarios. Now, this might really bring a lot of capacity back to the market, or it's going to continue to keep it constrained. That will have a huge impact on the rate levels. Back again to these port strikes, Donald Trump, start of Chinese Lunar New Year. And these are just events we're aware of. Think about all the stuff that we're not aware of, similar to what we expected in end of last year. We expected quiet 2024. Now, if you look at the horizon, it's much more known factors that could potentially shock supply chains and move the market. Here again, just want to point out these alliances shifting. I think it's worthwhile mentioning that they have very different strategies, which I will show you, but look at the size of MSC at this point and look at the order book with scheduled deliveries in 2025 by MSC at the right-hand chart, bottom right bar.
They are certainly big. I can see also, Arcadio, you are nodding your head, so I don't know whether it's in agreement or whether you want to share a few words with Patrick is saying here.
Yeah, no, I think that the key part as well, what Patrick is mentioning now, is that we have the new alliances coming in on February, right? And this will disrupt a lot of the schedules as we are used to. So that will also bring a lot of equipment and things into the disruption, right? So that would be a key element together with all the things that he has mentioned, right? That is going to happen on January. So definitely this is one thing to watch, because we like it or not, this is something that we know is going to be a disruption and we know that it's going to happen, right?
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Back to you, Patrick.
No, you're 100% correct, Arcadio. Just look at this slide here in terms of the number of distinct port pairs that they're planning to call, and look at different Gemini Corporation stacks up versus the other alliances on Asia to Europe and Asia to North America. And then customers, and I mentioned this, I think, in our previous webinar, Martin, in some way, I think this is good for the industry because A, they're trying something new and you always learn from that. But B, customers now actually have a more differentiated product offering from the sell side, which I think is also favorable. But it will take, as we've learned in our customer summit when Rolf Haben-Jansen joined and talked about this, it will take a few round trips before the alliance is fully functioning the way they intended.
But looking at the bigger picture, Patrick, if we go back a few years, back to the COVID days where everybody was, buying online furnitures or inventory, that sort of stuff, that was pushing up the rates one way or the other, right? So that was, you could say, pure demand, on capacity. Would you say that the market is more what we're looking into in the future? The market will be more stimulated based upon the capacity and where it's being allocated. So it's you could say the foundation on what is actually pushing the prices, whether it goes up and down, is more related also to that in the future.
Sorry, what do you mean, Morten? As
that in the past, the demand based on whether there was a lot, you saw GDP growth that was pushing up the rate levels, whereas today or tomorrow in the future, it's more on how the liners are allocating their allocation or their capacity into different trades. So
Yes.
It's not directly linked to you could say the behavior from the consumers on how much stuff we buy in China or in other areas, right? It's affected by other quite important matters as well.
Yeah, well, the big main underlying driver of rates is how well the carriers are able to balance supply versus demand. But it's so hard because of these events that we've talked about, right? A range of them that influences supply and demand, right? And then it's not like within air freight, you can sort of quickly move an airplane around the world with these large vessels. It takes so much time. So if you think about the beginning of this year with the Red Sea situation, we could immediately see the carriers like MSC rerouting their capacity away from Trans-Pacific or Australia trade and into Far East to Europe because the yield was so attractive, right? There's too much money from them. But then the knock-on effect is later on that these other trades also surge because you've taken capacity away from them, right? So how the carriers deploy their capacity relative to the demand is the absolute biggest influencer of how rates move, right?
I would just like to add on that one, right? That I think that we are experiencing that very different scenario going forward. In the COVID time, for example, we have the 3 alliances, and when the volumes went down, when everybody sent home, right? There was no volume, and that time the carriers they actually act very coordinated. I think that if we have a similar event in the future, they would have a more bigger problems to do this coordination because MSC now is standing alone, so they are not talking to others to stop services. Now we have the Gemini that is a corporation, it's not even an alliance, right? So this is also very different to what it was before. So I think that now we are more in a scenario similar to 2015, where the carriers were less coordinated. So I think on your point, Patrick, I think that the carriers will have a bigger issue to balance supply and demand going forward.
I agree, but I also think that one market fundamental has changed is that the carriers have learned that they do not need to increase their rates with $200 or $300, right? They can increase it with thousands of dollars. That whole market dynamic is changed for good. And then I just wanted to flag that we've seen since summer significant rate reductions, but on a couple of the big front hauls now, we also seen rates moving up, and that was sort of the last slide I wanted to pull up. And that has also consequences for the long-term contracts, which I wanted to share a little bit on, but we can see if time allows to go back on it because I think we covered a lot of sea freight.
Yeah. No worries. And we also have with us Anders and Jamie. Guys, you also have a few slides here, so just give it a go, and Patrick, and you just keep on adding more comments if you wish.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the very good insights, Patrick. One of the things you mentioned, Patrick, is the potential strike at the U.S. East Coast. And if some of you who also participated at the webinar in September may have flashbacks because we talked about the exact same back then. But the reality is it's a very hot topic once again. And the reason why we, from a DSV point of view, want to deep dive a little into this, that we actually find it very likely that this strike will happen 15th of January. And I will get back to you why we think that. First of all, just a short notice as where we are. We had a short strike of luckily only 3 days back in October, meaning the market did not disrupt as much as we had feared. Back then, there was made an extension of the master contract until 15th of January. I think the most, let's just say crazy thing is that ILA actually managed to get a 62% wage increase over the next 6 years. What ILA and USMX did not agree on is the main issue which we're still facing, and that's automation. Meaning ILA want to put into the contract, ILA being the port workers, wants to have into the next 6 years contract that no automation is allowed. And obviously, I believe everyone in this call can agree on that's quite a crazy demand to have in the world we're in right now. So that's where we're at, and that's actually the main reason why we believe that a strike is very likely 15th of January. We actually saw last time that the Biden administration backed up ILA here. ILA is a little trying to paint a picture where it's the foreign port owners and carriers against the United Port Workers, and actually they succeeded this way. So the Biden administration actually supported ILA, and very much looks like that the Trump administration will do the same. And if a new agreement is not agreed 15th of January, then actually the wage increase will also fall away, and we can start all over. So again, it's something which are just around the corner, and then you can ask yourself, what does it mean for me? I mean, if you do have export or import direct from the US East Coast, then it would have a very direct impact. I try to illustrate with the picture here. You can see the red dots. It's not just a little of the ports, it's each and every port on the East Coast. And not to be dramatic, but again, to draw a worst case scenario, then we can think back from the pandemic when we saw vessels on the US West Coast back then, lying hundreds of vessels, and how that does not only affect the US market, but has ripple effect to every market. I know that's worst case scenario, but again, we need to be very aware because something is cooking here. And Morten, if you're just going to shift to the next one, it's more or less the same as Patrick also had. So I'm gonna go really fast through this. But again,
no worries.
if you are expecting stability and silent waters, then you need to do something different than being in logistics right now. Because one thing is for sure, that's not gonna happen. And one thing is just as sure is that it's impossible to foresee what will actually happen. I think Patrick came with some good insights, but also how unsecure the market is actually going forward.
But what you say here, Anders, just to keep it tight, and we need to bring forward our expertise, towards the audience. What you're saying is that it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows. No. Certainly not. There's a lot of clouds out there, whether they are completely dark or not, we can't say. But be ready. Make sure you have a resilient supply chain that can absorb, you could say, changes coming in fastly. That's what you say.
Agree, and this is both in regards to stability, in regards to transit time, in regards to supply chain, but just as well in regards to rates. We can very likely see a market going up and down the next year as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Anders. Onwards to ETS. Jamie, I think that's you.
Thanks, Morten. Morning, everybody. Just wanted to give everybody a bit of an update on the ETS situation. Obviously, how the landscape's changing as we go into 2025. So just for some clarification there, the carriers currently have to buy allowances for 40% of their verified emissions for their vessels. That's expecting or will be rising to 70% in 2025. And then for 2026, that's going to rise to 100%. So what does that mean in terms of the overall costs? So we're expecting, as a quick calculation, that we're expecting that the ETS levels will double from where they are today in 2024 across the majority of the trades. However, there is a current loophole where some of the carriers are leaning a little bit more towards the first port of call in the UK. And basically what that means is that the carriers are only having to declare their emissions on the mileage from the UK port and around Europe, rather than if it was a Rotterdam first port of call, they would be having to pay the ETS charges on the longer journey. So yeah, there are some changes in the new alliances obviously coming up in next year. I think MSC have got some changes coming up that they're just going through in the next week or so. So we're expecting to see a couple more UK ports as first port of call added in there. However, we are fully expecting that loophole is going to be closing during an ETS review coming up for 2026. Yeah, just a bit of an update on that.
I guess, Jamie, that this is not the last that we will see to ETS in general, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's I mean, it's going to be a continuous update as we go through 2025. We've also got the new, I think Patrick, it was on one of Patrick's slides earlier about the Fuel EU maritime rules for 2025 also coming up. That basically means there's a directive now for some additional biofuels and low emission fuels to be added into the fuel mix for those vessels coming up in 2025. So yeah, that's the outlook. Next page, I think Morten just gives you an overview of where we are today in terms of those levels on the Europe-Asia westbound and what that looks like for 2025. There's still a few question marks on there. That's the expectations, but those are the ones we're still waiting to be confirmed.
Okay, got it.
I can see that Evergreen is the greenest, the most expensive. No, sorry, Costco. 84.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jamie. And please stay on board also to chime in on any potential questions. Yeah. So I think this is for you, Arcadio, on the Red Sea.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to share with the audience a big event that happened during this year, that due to the close of the Red Sea, then we get a new kind of league of carriers, that they are the carriers that are moving cargo into the Red Sea, closing the Bab el-Mandeb. So everybody's talking that the Red Sea is closed, but what is also happening is that none of the main carriers, right? We have Sea Lead, Express Carriers, Sea Star. So maybe not so many people know these names, or China United Lines, and there are quite a few more. Emirates as well, they are crossing the Red Sea. And what is happening is that it's also for you to be aware that today we actually have services from Asia into the Red Sea. And that means that you can ship a container from Shanghai and go into, for example, Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, or you can even cross the Suez Canal and go into Turkey, having the Red Sea access. So it's a bit of a niche service, and obviously people are a bit surprised, like, okay, what about the insurance cost? But this is kind of cover. And I think that what we are seeing right now is that due to the close of a Red Sea, that makes a big problem to some of the positions in Saudi Arabia, for example, in Egypt, where if you go through all around Africa and then you have to pay the Suez Canal, that actually makes it very expensive for the carriers. So just to give you an idea, the Suez Canal charges around $7 per ton that you transit there. If we have a 5,000 ton TEU vessel, that would be around $300,000 just to cross the Suez Canal. So it's not confirmed if they are paying or not to the Houthis, but it could be an economically reason to just cross the Red Sea and not crossing the Suez Canal, for example, and then just serve that area. Yeah. And I think that what we are seeing now is that only CMA is crossing, so it's not, they don't have they have an official service crossing the Red Sea, and they are the only carrier that are moving vessels over 15,000 TEUs, but they're still passing. But this is obviously not an official service that you can book and then say, okay, I can go to the Mediterranean. And obviously that is not to North Europe. But it's just for you to be aware that I think if we look at Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc., we are seeing more and more services that are being open. India as well, that is a big trade zone to the Middle East. And this is now the kind of a service available. And I think that would be the story as long as the Red Sea is kind of still officially closed for the large carriers.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you, Kai. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Good, then onwards to a new product, our new service, air freight. We also do that within the Air & Sea, and we have certainly some capabilities to cover a few slides here as well. Thomas and Mari, the word and the floor is yours.
We certainly do air freight as well, Morten. During the next couple of minutes, I'll together with Mari just try to give you an oversight of the current market, but more importantly of what to expect in 25. But if we just jump into the current market, we have seen during Q4 a large geographical imbalances, meaning that everything coming from Asia, coming from the subcontinent, coming from China has been outperforming the capacity. So basically rates has increased throughout all of Q4 from the Far East, but we actually seen the peak seasons not limited to Asian originated cargo. We've seen actually everything going west from Asia to Europe, but also actually from Europe to Americas has been short of capacity. And there's numerous reasons for this actually. One being that a lot of companies have changed from pure China production to a China plus one production to diversify the risk actually. So a lot of production has been moved to India, to Bangladesh, to Thailand, to Vietnam, and such countries. So we're seeing the pressure being on a lot of countries, not only China. And the Red Sea certainly haven't done us any favors in the air freight market in terms of pressure on the capacity, especially within the Indian subcontinent. We've seen a lot of fashion moving from ocean freight to air freight, and there's not enough capacity in the air freight market to absorb this. So you can say all of these has increased throughout Q4. What we also have seen is there's been a huge capacity movements, especially on the freighter market. A lot of freighters have moved from everywhere to Hong Kong and to South China, basically because this is where the high yield is within the e-commerce segment. But it's also meant that this capacity moving to China is now lacking the other regions. So there's actually less capacity to cope with the end of year rush we see in Q4. And that have made these rate fluctuations, especially on the westbound traffic for Asia and for Europe. But the main driver for all of this is still the e-commerce impact. We have seen that they are just have an absolutely amazing hunger for capacity. They expect this year that 52% of all freight moving out of China is e-commerce. And if you look down to Hong Kong and South China, that number is actually closer to 70%. And just to give you kind of a picture of it, it's 110 737 freighters every day moving out with e-commerce only. That's 100 ton each. And right now in Q4, that number is actually much, much higher because we have the big e-commerce day, single days, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and today it's double 12. Fortunately, that's the last one of them. But just to say, in this period, the e-commerce have maybe taken out 200 freighters of the market. Yeah. And my expectation
People need to stop shopping on Temu.
Exactly, Maya. That's what we have to do, all of us. But just to say that I expect another 10 days, perhaps we will see the same pressure on the capacity, but then it is going to loosen up and a lot of capacity is going to move into the general market. So there is at least a softer market ahead of us. All of this is actually also bringing a few of these bottlenecks and customs issues. One of them, the bottlenecks, is always a seasonal thing. We see that in China, we see that in Dubai, but we've seen this year around is actually they also put a bit of pressure on the national customs authorities, simply because there's hundreds of thousands of daily entries of these low-value e-commerce. So it's just stressing out the customs, then adding to the complexity in the supply chain, and maybe also on the lead time. But if we are to end up with just a few silver linings on the Q4 market, it is actually that all that capacity being moved out to China has actually made the peak in Asia more maneuverable than it was last year, where all were caught by surprise by the e-commerce market. So despite high rates, despite long lead times, everything is available for air freight. So we are getting everything up and flying. Another one is that, westbound is an issue, but, going east is not an issue. We have plenty of capacity coming from Americas to Europe and the other way going east. So in that market, at least, we still see some good markets. And final, last one, before I leave it over to you, Mari, is we are in the midst of the storm, but, we're just a couple of weeks ahead, at least from it's loosening and up. So there are lights ahead of the tunnel. And I guess that would actually be my keyword to you, Mara, to say that I painted the black picture from the current market, and now you can talk about all the good days ahead of us.
Well, it's a matter of seeing the glass half full or half empty, right? So, and the big task of actually looking into the crystal ball right now, it's huge because, the sea freight guys already mentioned it's going to be a difficult month coming up in January, and that is, of course, going to impact the air freight market as well. But nonetheless, if you look at the demand, I think as IATA predicted, it's going to be a 5.8% growth for 25 versus the 11 to 13% growth that we've seen in 24. Obviously, there are comments towards the e-commerce predicting to slow down, as you mentioned, Thomas. And this has to do with the regulations, and I mentioned this in previous webinars as well. The de minimis, everything that's actually moving on that front. You'll see it in EU as well, I believe. But they're also, well, I have to mention as well, there's still developing markets on that front. You have Latin America, East Europe, Africa, when they start shopping on Temu. I mean, there are some factors in there as well that can impact. In terms of capacity, it was also mentioned by the sea freight guys. Great presentation from you, so I keep repeating it. It's going to affect the air freight as well. But in terms of the aircrafts and the retirements as well, we see due to the new deliveries not coming along, Boeing having issues. I think everyone's aware of that. And then obviously the flying hours on the current aircrafts it's on maximum. So the capacity is still also expected to remain somewhat flat. And I think it's also important here to mention the sustainability part, the SAF surcharge. Spoken about this previously as well, how this will impact the air freight side. We now see the mandate from the Refuel EU. From January, carriers departing EU will have to have the 2% SAF blended into the jet fuel. This will have an impact on the fuel cost. And there will be more to come in 2025, especially following Corsia. And then I think, well, not to steal too much time from the road freight guys, we'll just quickly look at the next slide as well. We spoke a bit about this actually yesterday, Thomas, because it is a cyclical pattern. I mean, so if we're going to believe that pattern, that also sort of supports the slowdown that we will see. But again, the world is a changing place. Something new happens every day. So if we switch to the next slide and look at the possible disruptions, my God, there's a lot of them. And yeah, I mean, it's all been mentioned here. So Red Sea, Russia, Ukraine, disruptions in the geopolitical side that will impact the airspace, the possible trade war, tariff. We see the high pressure on especially the US part right now as well coming up. The Middle East, the climate change we saw last week, I mean, into Amsterdam and Heathrow. I actually landed on Heathrow myself on Saturday. Wasn't a pleasant experience, I have to say. So there's a lot of different factors going to impact the air freight market as well. But again, Thomas, I think from our discussions as well, we're hoping that it will slow a bit down because it's been the Q4 madness, as you say.
But your takeaway is it's not about painting any black skies as such, but more like be resilient, be prepared.
Yeah.
I think the early parts of this potential or this particular year, it was a calm year. We saw at least for sea freight, we saw that rates were coming down, and then they have bumped up again, and now they are. Yeah, a bit up and down. Air freight has been a bit different, but what you are saying is that 2025 can be volatile, and you have to be prepared in that regard, right?
Yeah, I think when we go into 25, we'll see a bit of the same as we did in 24. You know, the fluctuation is going to be the same in 24, but I think we're going to go into normality now at the early months of the year, and probably going to last throughout much of the year, and then we get into Q4 being kind of the same as we do here. And I think the only thing that is constant in our world is that it's ever changing. Exactly. So we have to be ready to adapt to whatever new obstacles that might occur. But I do actually believe that we will see a bit of normality at least for the next 12 months, 6 months, maybe not 12, but for the next half a year, I hope.
We
all
hope
depending on the East Coast strike. If sea freight decides to stop, then we might be busy in the air freight.
Yeah, we hope that for our lovely customers calling in here, listening to us. All right, we have our superstar, Frankie boy, Frank Madsen. Frankie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Morten?
It's loud and clear as always.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm just struggling a bit with my camera, but let's just see how that's going to work. Thank you for the invite again, Morten. I was absent the last time, so sorry about that. If we look into the road market in general for the northern part of Europe, we still see the market as being highly competitive, with all the major players battling for new market share. And then we also see the major players are still investing in their end-to-end solutions to gain this higher volume, and DSV being one of them, I would say, and we are looking forward to that. The European market is still evolving, and we see that high focus on sustainability, automation of procedures, and a more digital transformation in the road freight market is still on the way, and which is really good for the whole market in general. Companies, we foresee that companies will face high pressure on resilience related to the supply chains related to geopolitics and uncertainties in the economics in the region. The economy, we have seen a general slowdown for all of 2024. The expectations are for 25 is set to be to improve. But the freight volumes is still as is. We'll expect it to be as is, but or slightly up in that sense. Especially the Baltics has seen a quite heavy inflation since 2022, and with new taxations program coming in and so on, they don't see any rapid growth for the next 6 months, unfortunately. But this is something that we will get back to and follow quite closely. On the cost side, we see still a high pressure from the shipping lines, which also mentioned here by my colleagues from the sea freight department. Also on the haulage and the rail contractors, as capacity is predicted to stabilize. High focus on different types of fuel. In that sense, both HVO and electric trucks, and as we just already heard about the ETS system, will further impact the road freight for 2025. We believe that this will for during 2025 will drive up the cost as well. So on the Brexit side, we are still see a lot of companies working with disruptions related to the change due to Brexit. So even Brexit is quite some time ago already, but we see still quite a big drop in the export out of UK, and still companies are adapting to the trade regulations related to the Brexit, which is quite important.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Go. I think if I take the next one, truck driver shortage. We've mentioned this several times, Frank, and this is affecting the market quite heavily. How are we doing in that regard?
Still, there's a big lack of truck drivers. More than 500,000 vacancies are in the market at the moment. A lot of companies and countries within, not only by DSV, but also other organizations in each country, are working really hard on trying to recruiting new drivers and setting up education systems for them and so on. But this is something that it is for sure is going to be a huge challenge for the road freight market in the future. And not to mention, all the other challenges related to demands on nationality, language that the drivers are demanded to speak, and so on. And especially in the Nordics, I mean, it's really difficult now these days to find a pure Nordic driver, and this is something that we are really working hard on. So. And will be a continued challenge in the road freight market for sure.
Probably also going to push the robotics automation even further, right? Because there's certainly a need for more capacity in that regard. And if you can't source it because of, unfortunately, a war, then you would need to find other ways, I assume, right?
For sure, yes. And that is going to be really interesting to follow how that's going to evolve. That's for sure. Yeah. I don't know if you want to take the next slide or you.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
So going ahead for 2025, we already talked about the ETS. That is also applicable for road freight, obviously. We will see other tolling and other road taxes are coming. evolving the e-toll in Poland, and the new Danish CO2 road tax will also come next year. And all these are obviously something that we need to really be careful about how to handle that together with the freight cost in general and so on, battling in the market.
Very
I don't
good.
know. Yeah. And the last slide I see coming up here, I think this was also presented on the last webinar. This is something that I just want to take in because this is going to be really interesting for us to follow. There's a high demand on these different types of fuels for trucks in the road market, and obviously the purchase of all these electric trucks from the DSV side is very interesting to follow and see how that's going to be implemented. Yeah. So, and it will for sure give us a good position to work in the green logistic market for sure. Yeah.
Good stuff, Frank.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanna highlight?
No, yeah, I saw on the second slide you jumped a little bit quickly over.
Oh, yeah, I can go back on it. No worries.
Yeah, it's just related to the Ukraine. Just to mention that a little bit. Ukraine has now been in a war for more than 1,000 days. DSV is one of the few who has been operating at all times in Ukraine, despite the war, which is quite impressive, I would say. And Ukraine is really looking into integrate a lot more with the European logistics network, especially on the road side. And we are working very closely with our dear colleagues in Kiev on different solutions. And being Ukraine being a candidate for the European Union has for sure accelerated the ambition of being a part of the European logistics network. So that we are looking into looking forward to as well.
Frank, a small question coming in here,
yes.
just on your final half minute.
Yeah.
Is there any markets in general when it comes to Europe, North Europe, where you see that there's an overcapacity?
We would say there's plenty, or plenty is a very tough word, but for the bigger Nordic countries in terms of freight volumes, being Sweden, Denmark, there is an overcapacity, and that has actually been driving the market for the whole 2024. And going into 25, we see that there will be a more stabilized situation related to this. But there will still be challenges concerning the export imbalance for various markets, and that's quite important to take into account. Especially on countries for Norway, where I'm sit myself, and Finland would be very hardly affected by an imbalance.
Okay.
So
thank you very
that's
much.
for me.
Yeah, very, very good, Frank, as always.
Okay. Yeah.
Coming onwards to questions, I think we've covered quite a lot here during the session, but I have one here for you, Arcadio, maybe also for Jamie and Anders as well. But what are we doing in order to control the alliances that is shaping the market when it comes to sea freight?
Good question. Well, I think that at the moment now it's the relationship with the carriers, right? So it's up to the relationship we have with each one of them. And obviously it's like having good relationship, knowing that they are part of an alliance of corporations, and we know that this is the service that they are holding, right? Yeah. So it's still within, Gemini, it's very different to speak to Hapag-Lloyd and to Maersk. So this is also the way we are doing it. So as I said, to me, it's going back more to the 2015, where we still have a kind of a one-to-one relationship. But I don't know if Jamie or Anders want to add on to this.
Yeah, but I actually have a couple of comments, and I also believe we touched base on it at the last webinar back in September, because from a DSV point of view, we are looking very much forward to what's going to happen, because we're going from 3 alliances into 4 alliances. Well known that MSC will more or less be a standalone carrier, but we have very good relationship into each and every alliance. And what is very, very interesting is, for the first time in 25 years, we will see a very different approach from each carrier. We have the Gemini who are going for the hub strategy. We have the others going more direct, meaning that we are able due to this relationship to move things around to whoever have the best rates. And this flexibility is, of course, something we can pass on to our clients, to our customers. So I see this as being very interesting, and I'm very excited.
Very good. Jamie, any final comments?
No, really, only on the Gemini. I think we've already mentioned from that side of things. Obviously, they've got some very tough targets to try and meet with their hub and spoke system for next year, trying to get to 90% schedule reliability, which is I think everybody probably realises is going to be pretty tough. But if at least they get somewhere close to it, that might hopefully bring everybody else their schedule reliability to be a little bit more in line, and everybody can get their goods hopefully a little bit quicker than they have done.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Anders, and thank you, Arcadio. All right, no further questions, at least for now. Also, I want to highlight here, Xeneta is also doing their outlook reports, both for ocean as well as for air freight. We will, of course, share the entire content associated with what we have presented today, as well as a recording, so you can share that with your colleagues. Also, we will continue doing webinars. We will have our quarterly market webinars. I thank you all for joining up. We will also make specific webinars associated with special topics that may be relevant at the given point in time. So we will let you know, and I hope that it will be super exciting. You can also go in and follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe, and obviously you will then be feeded with the information. Last but not least, you can either contact Patrick or me or any of your DSV associates that you are already in contact with. We are here to support. With no further ado, I thank the entire guest speaking panel. Thank you for chiming in, and I thank everybody for viewing in. It was good to see all of you. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a great New Year, and then we'll see each other in 2025. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Morten.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Morten.